Hi everybody. Since we're approaching the midway point of our class, I thought it would be a good time to go over the requirements for the final paper. You can find these requirements written out in the folder on our Angel site that says final paper, but I figured it would be good to discuss them, especially now that you have some context of what we mean when we talk about organizational communication and how it can lead to certain outcomes in the organization. So if you wanted to pull up the paper while I go through this on the video, kind of like we did with the syllabus, that might be really useful for you. I'm also going to reference the paper, so you'll see me look away and then look back as I do that. So the final paper is due August 6th. You'll note that's after the official last day of the class. It's during what would be our exam period. Since you don't have a final exam, you just have this final paper. That's when it's due. Like everything else, it's due by midnight on that day. It's a 10 to 12 page paper, double spaced, and basically you're going to take that organization that you created during the first week and expand on it. You're going to provide some background for it, a mission statement for it, and talk about how communication is used to quote-unquote get things done and what happens when there is miscommunication. And in order to facilitate the discussion about how communication is used to get things done, you're going to reference the topics that we cover in class. So for example, one of the topics you might choose to talk about is what type of management paradigm it has. So say you created a restaurant. Does your restaurant employ scientific management, human relations, human resources, or contingency theories? Also, you could talk about how your organization is a system. What kind of inputs does it have, processes, and outputs? As we move further into the semester, and even this week, you're kind of getting an idea for some of the more focused topics like technology. I think your organizations would be a great place to talk about technology. So you should know from your reading that there's different types of systems in an organization, ICT systems such as communication systems, control systems, and decision support systems. So for example, again, if you created a restaurant, what kind of technology do you use in your organization to facilitate communication? When I was a waitress, maybe 15 or so years ago, it might have been more than that, but when I was a waitress a long time ago, it started out, I would have to write up the ticket, stick it behind the line for the chef. The chef would have to interpret my handwriting or my abbreviations or what I meant, and then prepare the plate and put it out. You can imagine that was a little bit more time consuming and often led to miscommunication. Now with communication systems, a lot of you, if you work in a restaurant, probably know you can use the micro swipe cards, use the computer to input your order, and if you have to make modifications to order, there's preset abbreviations for everything, so it's fairly easy to do, and it drastically cuts down on the amount of errors between the kitchen and the wait staff. So that would be one example of how you might use technology in your workplace. I've seen some really creative examples of this in the past, but that would be one way. So you'll notice in my example, it talks about what the technology is. So it's important, because this is in lieu of a final exam, that you define your terms. So let me know what you're saying. Don't be subtle, be explicit. Pretend you're talking to someone who doesn't know what these systems are or what you're talking about. So describe the system, describe how it works in your organization, and describe its impact on the communication. So again, I just said what the communication system, well actually I didn't go into too much detail about what the communication system was, but you should cite from your reading, or if there was a lesson to correspond, cite from the lesson. Then you would also talk about how it's used. So I said to put in orders between the waitstaff and the kitchen, and then how it impacts communication, more efficiency, more speed. Okay, so that is kind of how you would treat any given topic. As we move forward, we'll be dealing with issues such as diversity. When we talk about diversity in organizations, we'll talk about barriers to diversity. We'll talk about issues such as homogenization, creation of the other, marginalization. So you would hopefully talk about how you would avoid homogenization or marginalization in your workplace. So you would define the terms, talk about strategies that you implement to kind of avoid those barriers to diversity, and then talk about how that impacts communication in your workplace. So hopefully you're getting kind of a good feel for what I'm looking for based on what I'm saying. I do have a requirement of the number of topics that I want you to cover, and it is on the assignment sheet. Let's see, we explicitly discuss them from topics in class. So you should cover a minimum of 7 of the topics that we discussed throughout the semester. And the topics are those keywords that I put in the weekly titles. So again, it could be strategies of organizing. So for example, again, the traditional strategies would be, is it scientific management, human relations, human resources. It could be how networks work in your organization, technology, diversity, how globalization impacts your organization. any of the topics basically that we cover are fair game. Include a minimum of 7 in your paper. And again, like, you can deal with these in about like probably 2 paragraphs. You don't have to go overboard in your descriptions, but there's a certain, I guess, like, art to writing in a way that is concise and gets across your point. So I give you the guideline of 10 to 12 pages. Really about 2 to 3 paragraphs for each topic would work nicely. If you could say what you need to say fully in a little bit less, that's fine. If you need to go maybe 1 paragraph over for each, that's fine too. But just make sure you're saying everything clearly and including the important points of what needs to be said. In doing that, I also want you to include citations from the text as well as from the lessons that I have online. I prefer APA citation style. That's what's used for a lot of social sciences. So if you're a business major, you probably use that. If you're a corp comm major, you also probably use that. If you're a psychology major, you probably use that too. If you don't, for whatever reason, you rely on MLA or Chicago style, you can write up the paper in that format and just make a note so that I know what I'm grading. I'm going to, over the next couple days, put together kind of like a cheat sheet and some resource links for what APA style is, so that if you're not familiar with it, you can familiarize yourself, so that going forward you'll know exactly what that citation style is and how you need to properly cite any quotes that you take out of any kind of text, whether it's the lessons, whether it's the readings, or whether it's outside sources that you may or may not choose to involve. So the first part of your paper, you're just setting up what the organization is. You create a mission statement that you put as an appendix at the back of the paper. So it doesn't count as part of your page limit or page count. But a mission statement is basically a concise statement of what the organization is all about. I don't believe we explicitly cover it in class this semester, just because of time and space. I didn't include a discussion on mission statements, I don't believe. But you can basically Google, or not Google, go to any Fortune 500 website and look in the About Us section, and you'll probably find a mission statement. For a great example of one that I know you can find, you can look up Johnson & Johnson's website, jnj.com, and look at the credo. That is essentially what a mission statement is. Mission statements are usually fairly brief, 1 paragraph to 2 paragraphs, and they really concisely outlay like kind of the ideals and goals of the organization. And that should help you with your introduction too. Also included in your introduction, what your organization is and just some basic details. How many employees? Is it brick and mortar or is it online? Is it part of a chain or franchise, or is it standalone? How many departments does it have? Basics like that. If you had to describe, for example, where you work to me, if I asked you all to describe your place of work, that's kind of what I'm getting at there. The second section is the largest section of the paper, and that is how communication is used to get things done. And I just talked about that. And then the last section of your paper is the flip side. What happens with miscommunication or when things go wrong? So again, you could take some of those topics that you covered in the middle section, how communication is used to get things done, and talk about what happens when things go wrong. So for example, what happens if your management style doesn't line up with the type of business you're running? What happens if you're running scientific management, but maybe sometimes a bit of human resources might be more appropriate? Or what happens when technology fails? Or what happens when people aren't properly trained in diversity? How can these same issues that facilitate communication go wrong and hinder communication? Okay, so all of this is written up again in the assignment sheet, which you could find in the final paper folder. Let's see, I just want to check and see if there is anything else. Make sure that your paper has an introduction and a conclusion. That's something that's so basic, but something that I often find lacking in papers as well. So I will be grading primarily on content, but I also do grade on grammar and structure. So there is a brief write-up on the assignment sheet. It says a paper will be thorough and detailed, will meet approximate length guidelines, be correct in assumptions and answers, effectively integrate course readings and notes with original thoughts, and written in a formal and grammatically correct style. Points will be deducted if any or all of these specifications are not met. Citations from readings and class notes are necessary to support your points. You should consider every lesson or topic that we covered in class, and you can narrow it down to 7, but definitely try to figure out why you're choosing those 7, and potentially mention, but don't elaborate on any that you don't include in your paper. And so that is it. in terms of the assignment itself. In order to help you out, I've put on Angel a folder that says optional assignment, and it would be having you create your introduction and mission statement. So it's not formally graded, you won't receive credit for it, but I will be sure to give you feedback. So if you wanted to, sometime in the next week or two, write up your introduction, write up your mission statement, or more. You can do an outline of the paper. You can really do whatever works for you. Send it to me. That way you know you're on the right track, and you kind of know what the assignment is all about. I will say that I can't guarantee if you wait until the last week of class, I can't guarantee that I'll get you the feedback in a timely manner, just because of time restraints. So if you're really looking to get feedback from me, sooner is better than later. One more thing to note, you are allowed to work on this alone or in pairs. So I've given you my thoughts and opinions on group work before. I think it's great. I think it's a great way to get to know people, to kind of brainstorm together, integrate different ideas, to kind of get new approaches. But I also know that sometimes working together, especially in an online environment, can be very challenging. So I just ask you to let me know in advance if you're working on your own paper or if you're working in pairs. And just like with the interactive lessons, if you choose to work in a partnership and your partner doesn't pull his or her weight, that can't count as an excuse for late work when the final paper is due. So keep that all in mind as you move forward. Some of you had really effective partnerships for the interactive lesson, and perhaps maybe a few more of you will try it. I believe we have an interactive lesson next week, so maybe you'll give it a try then and see if it works for you. As you've gotten to know each other through the discussions and other activities, it's entirely possible that you now feel comfortable reaching out to someone to work together. So that should basically cover it for the final paper. I did also, both in the final paper folder and the optional assignment folder, include a paper that says hints for approaching your work today, because I think that sometimes the idea behind this paper sounds a bit abstract. I have included some kind of like approaches for how you might want to frame your paper. So maybe pretend you're a communication consultant who's been called in to assess an organization, and your final paper is the report that you give. Or perhaps you are a CEO who's been asked to describe your organization, some sort of conference or seminar. That might also be an approach you want to take. And I've also included a couple paragraphs from papers in the past that have done a really good job of integrating ideas in the way that I'm talking about, so that you can just see some samples to kind of help you get started, get moving on your way, because sometimes I find it helpful to see what other people have done before I get started on what I am doing. And really, I know I've said that's it a couple times now, but I mean it this time. If you have any questions, feel free to post in any of the Ask Your Instructor discussions or send me an email directly. Okay, have a great day.